With Rabbi Goldstein being out this week, I had a really good Devar Torah to share with you. I was excited about doing it. It was going to come from the Haftarah because this week's Haftarah that Ari just chanted contains one of my favorite pieces of Nevi'im, the image of the tree planted by water. And some of you have come to prayer song. I see a few of you with me, and we've chanted this, make me like a tree planted by water, make me like a tree planted near water, make me like a tree planted near water. And that's what I was going to talk about. But then our nation experienced a tragedy on Tuesday. Yet another massacre that left 21 people dead, including 19 fourth graders and 2 teachers. How could I talk about trees planted near water on a week when 19 beautiful saplings were ripped out of the ground? I had a busy day on Tuesday and wasn't paying attention to the news, and I didn't hear what happened until Ari came home and told me later that evening. And even though a similar event just happened here in Laguna Woods just a week ago and in Buffalo 2 weeks ago, I was still in disbelief at first. I send my own children to school every day. Ari packs their lunches. I buckle them in the car. I kiss them goodbye and tell them I'll be there to pick them up. On Tuesday, 19 sets of parents lived their worst nightmare. This weekend right now should have been a celebration of the last day of school in Uvalde, Texas, which would have been yesterday, but instead, 21 families are planning funerals. Tuesday night, as I scrolled through the news, I sat in cosmic grief. I stayed up late that night, very late, and FaceTimed my sister at 1:30 a.m. because she lives in Switzerland, so it was morning for her. And we just wept together on the phone. Since Tuesday, I can't stop weeping. There are intermittent pauses, even this morning. But then I turn on the radio or check Twitter, details about the children who were lost, stories of fathers and mothers, and I can't stop weeping. And I want to just pause to say that I don't want to talk about whose fault this is. I don't want to speak about GUNS's or mental health, and those are both 2 very big, important issues that are for a different place, different time. This week in the Parsha, we read verses of Tochacha, admonition, that warn us about deviating from our covenant with God. Specifically in chapter 26 in the Triennial, we didn't read that section today, but that's part of the Parsha. Traditionally, we chant the Tochacha in a subdued voice to show our reluctance for any ill to befall our people. The core teaching of the Tochacha is to alert Israel against turning to idol worship. And that's what I want to talk about. The problem with idol worship is not just the offense of bowing down to a graven image or worshiping nature or supernatural powers. It's that idolatry is inherently centered in self-interest. The purpose of idol worship in ancient times was a specific need or desire: fertility, crops, food, health. And this isn't to say that those needs aren't valid or worthy. They're the opposite. These are basic human needs without which we could not survive. And the lives of our ancient ancestors was very difficult. Life expectancies were much lower, and infant and child mortality rates were very high, and people lived without running water and sometimes without a stable food supply. And there was no medicine and no hospitals and no surgeons. And it's understandable that idol worship would be an integrated part of such difficult living conditions. People must have felt so desperate and vulnerable on a daily basis. But idolatry is only about getting one's needs met. It's not about serving a higher power. It does not even recognize the higher power in the sense that I must conform to the values and conform my actions to those values of the higher power. It uses the higher power, the gods, the powers that be, whatever, to get what I want. Therefore, idol worship is all about finding favor for me, for myself, without regard for others, and perhaps even at the expense of others. In the Parsha today, in chapter 26, it speaks of God tearing down the bamot, which were the symbol and location of ancient idol worship. It says, V'hishmadati et bamotechem, I will destroy your high places and cut down your incense stands. Bama means a high place. That's how we traditionally translate it. It's the same root as the word bima, the raised platform that I'm standing on right now. And in ancient times, bamot were man-made structures, usually like a four-cornered rock on which idol worship and pagan rituals took place. And bamot are mentioned in the Torah, including in this week's reading, and especially in the book of Kings, always with the admonition to strike them down. And the reason that bamot were to be struck down was not just because they were a symbol of idol worship, but they were also the physical site of atrocities that took place in pagan ritual, including human sacrifice. Creating stone altars and performing pagan rituals that involve human sacrifice sounds so barbaric to us, so backwards and foreign to our modern sensibility. It's hard to imagine rituals like that. How could any human being stomach such a horror? How could any society allow systematized murder in the name of idol worship? It's really baffling, isn't it? It feels easy to look back on those ancient cultures almost as a caricature, those bad pagan Canaanites, though Israel was surely doing it too. But this week, I kept thinking to myself, are we really that different? I will spare you repeating some of the horrific details I read in the news this week. I'm sure you've seen them. We are guilty of the sin of idolatry. We are guilty of the sin of human sacrifice, child sacrifice. I grew up in Dallas, Texas. Actually dedicated 3 or 4 minutes of my morning this morning deciding which boots to wear here. I spent every summer of my childhood at Lake Texoma with my family. There's a small compound of cabins there where my grandparents, parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, and cousins had many cookouts and barbecues and bonfires. We sunbathed near the lake, spent scorching summer days water skiing and racing jet skis. The cabin that my grandfather built in Texoma still belongs to our family, and Ari and I have taken the boys there. And because my grandfather's birthday was the day before Independence Day, we went there every single 4th of July as a kid and saw the most amazing fireworks show in the world. And because of his love for this country, and also because my grandfather served in the U.S. military, the entire cabin, to this day, is decorated in red, white, and blue. The exterior is white with blue trim, and inside there's blue carpet and red sofas and USA pillows, and flag memorabilia everywhere. And following in my grandfather's footsteps, my brother Micah served in the Army and in the National Guard doing 2 tours in Iraq. The first one, he shipped out the week after his 19th birthday and was gone for 1 year in 2004. That was the first one. He did another one in 2007. 2004, it was the hardest year ever for our family. He's the baby. Micah's the baby of the family, and it was really hard. He came home, and he's in D.C. now. He's about to get married next week. I tell you this because I am a proud American, and I come from a family of very, very proud Americans who love this country. And it pains me to say that we are guilty of the sin of idolatry. We have allowed self-interest to guide us individually and collectively, and we use the powers that be. Use, misuse, and appease the powers that be just to get what we want, demonizing those we disagree with. And demonization of others is a telltale sign of idolatry, without concern for who gets trampled along the way. We do not care to listen to each other. Unfriend, delete, block off of Facebook. We make fun of those we disagree with. We tell lies about the other side. And though we hide behind the language of our values, we do not own up to the fact that our highest value is really just ourselves and our own life, liberty and pursuit of happiness, and no one else's. We sit alone with our smartphones and type hateful words that we would never say to someone's face. We construct bamot, high places, places that seem important and lofty, where all of these behaviors are sanctioned and modeled and even applauded. From the Haftarah today, Chatat Yehuda Katuva, the guilt of our people is inscribed be'et varzel, with an iron pen, B'tziporin Shamir, engraved with an adamant point, Harusha al luach libam, on the tablet of our hearts and on the horns of our altars. Kis korbanehem mizbechotam, where our children are memorialized on our altars of worship, our pagan altars of worship. I will turn your wealth and all your treasures into spoils because of the sin of your bamot, your man-made high places where you have done these atrocities. But the Haftarah goes on. What is the antidote to this? First, as is appropriate this Memorial Day weekend, we remember the fallen. Not just the brave ones who sacrificed themselves for this country, but the innocent ones who were sacrificed. Remember the fallen. Look at their pictures, read their stories, say their names. But in Judaism, it's not enough to merely remember. We must also act. In our tradition, we light a yahrzeit candle, or when we say Yizkor prayers, traditionally we give tzedakah in the name of the ones we remember. In Judaism, to merely pray or to merely bless is a bracha levatala, a prayer said in vain, an unauthorized blessing. Offering prayers and thoughts without action is a sin. We must remember and we must act. Second, we must make every effort individually and collectively to tear down the bamot in our society, the man-made structures upon which we are guilty of idol worship. Specifically, we must look at the ways in which we are allowing our self-interests, knowingly or unknowingly, willfully or unwillfully, to infringe upon and even sometimes harm others. It's not wrong to have self-interests. It's not wrong to want the best for ourselves and our own, but it is wrong to do it at the expense of others. We must push ourselves to see outside of ourselves and be willing to make sacrifices. And perhaps the best example of living up to this ideal is that of our fallen soldiers whose memory we honor this weekend. As it is inscribed on the Korean War Veterans Memorial of Washington, D.C., freedom is not free. Finally, instead of using ourselves as the starting point from which we reach out to the powers that be to get whatever we want or need, we can turn to the Holy One who created each of us, who gave us the Torah so that we can live in true freedom. When we start with only ourselves, there is demonization and competitiveness and inevitable dehumanization and loss. But when we start with the Holy One, and we look to God, and we look to Torah, and we recognize that God has created each of us in God's image, that's when we can begin to do the work. Baruch hagever asher yiftak b'Adonai, blessed be the person who trusts in Adonai. V'haya Adonai mivtacho, whose trust is in Adonai alone. V'haya ke'etz shatul al mayim. They shall be like a tree planted by water, sending forth its roots by a stream. It does not sense the coming of heat. Its leaves are ever fresh. It has no care in a year of drought. It does not cease to yield fruit. God of life, may we turn to you. May we take root in the waters of Torah and bring life to a world that feels like it's on fire. Make us like a tree planted near water. God, creator of life, lover of life, may there be no more bloodshed, not one single man, woman, or child. Rafa'enu Adonai v'nei Rafeh, heal us, O God, and we will be healed. Hoshienu v'nei Vashia, save us, and we will be saved. Shabbat shalom.